everyone, welcome to Killer Bites, a show that features insane true crime stories and drool-worthy recipes. Yep, you heard that right, crime and food. Think of it as a way of lightening the mood of the cases we discuss and providing you with something nice to look at. In today's episode, I'm going to give you all the deets about the Coleman family murders while making some loaded nacho fries. If you're curious, the recipe is in the description below. From serving in the Marines to working as a bodyguard, Chris Coleman had always been keen on protecting other people. Now, you'd think that would translate to his family at home, but one day Chris's wife and two sons were found lifeless, and all signs were pointing to him. As sketchy as Chris seemed, he claimed the crime was committed by televangelist haters who were sending him threatening letters. To get started, I'm going to put these fries in the oven. It was 6:42 a.m. on May 5th, 2009 when Detective Sergeant Justin Barlow's phone rang. He picked it up and heard the voice of his neighbor, Chris Coleman. Chris said he was worried because his wife, Sherry, wasn't answering his calls. He asked Justin to check in on his wife and kids and told him he'd meet them there in about 5 minutes. Okay, but why couldn't Chris just check on them when he got home before calling Justin at 6:42 in the freaking morning? Well, Justin agreed to go over there. He threw on his clothes, grabbed his gear, and called a dispatcher at the police department in Columbia, Illinois to notify them of his visits. An officer named Jason was already in the area, so he met Justin there for the welfare check. When the two officers knocked on the front door, no one answered. So Justin stayed at the front of the house while Jason headed around to the back to check things out. Moments later, Jason radioed Justin and said, "You'd better come back here. There's a window open. The screen's out." That doesn't sound good. The men called for backup and climbed through the window. They drew their weapons and slowly started making their way through the basement and up the stairs. There was a strong smell of fresh paint, and as soon as Justin and Jason made it to the first floor, they realized what it was. Spray paint on the walls. Super concerning words and sentences were written in red spray paint throughout the kitchen. Punished, I am always watching, and you have paid were just a few of the things Justin and Jason read. Now I'm going to saute some onions and garlic in a pan with oil and balsamic vinegar. The spray paint continued up the stairs, so the officers decided to follow the trail. Meanwhile, Chris just pulled up in the driveway as well as another cop, Steve. This was 13 minutes after Chris said he'd be home in 5 minutes, by the way. Steve told Chris to stay outside while they searched the home. Jason headed for the master bedroom, Steve went down the hall, and Justin entered one of the kids' rooms. Justin saw a little boy lying in the bed, and at first glance it looked like he'd been sleeping. But as Justin got closer, he noticed the boy's limbs looked stiff and his skin was almost gray. In the master bedroom, Jason shouted out to the men saying he found Sherry, Chris's wife. As for Steve, he peered in the doorway and found another little boy lying motionless in his bed. All three of the Colemans had no pulse. It was too late. There were marks on their necks that suggested they were throttled, and Sherry had ligature marks and a black eye, so it was clear she put up a fight. While still upstairs, Steve warned his fellow officers, "This might be our guy. Limit what we tell him." The three men then made their way downstairs and out the front door. Chris was notified that his family didn't make it, and he just sat on the ground crying. He didn't really ask any questions about how his family was snuffed or anything, which the cops found pretty odd. Like every homicide case, Chris was brought in for questioning with Justin and another detective named Dave. Since Chris was the only surviving member of the family, they thought he might have information to help detectives put the pieces together. It's also protocol to ask next of kin information about the victims and such. In his interview, Chris said he got up that morning at 5:30 and headed out for the gym. On his drive, he called Sherry, but she didn't answer. Chris went about his workout, and on his way back home, he called his wife again. When she didn't pick up this time, Chris called his detective neighbor to go and check in on his wife, and, well, you know what happened from there. Detectives asked Chris about the suspicious marks on his arms, and he responded, "I think it was when I was the gurney. In the ambulance, I was hitting the pillow." Okay. They also asked him about his military background and current job. So the thing about Chris is he worked a pretty high-stakes job. He was the bodyguard for the famous Christian televangelist Joyce Meyers. Although Joyce had a lot of fans, her controversial beliefs and speeches earned her a lot of haters as well. While most of those haters targeted their threats at Joyce, several of them went for Chris too. Chris told the investigators about the threats that he received in emails and letters. One email read, "Deny your God publicly or else. No more opportunities." Both publicly and opportunities were misspelled. Another said, "Tell Joyce to stop preaching the bullshit or Chris's family will die. I will kill them all as they sleep." Whoa, hold up. Someone directly threatened to snuff his family days before it actually happened? That might be something there. One time, while Chris was traveling with Joyce in Hawaii, a scary letter was delivered to his home. Sherry was super freaked out because Chris wasn't there, but once he got back in town, they filed a police report and Columbia cops amped up their patrol in the area. Around that time is when Chris first reached out to his detective neighbor Justin to tell him about the situation. Justin agreed to set up a camera in his son's window that faced Chris's mailbox. That way, if anyone else delivered another threatening letter or even came by to break in or attack the family, it would be caught on camera. But with all of the increased security, officers never saw anything suspicious, and the camera didn't capture anything out of the ordinary. The detectives were also a bit skeptical about these threats too. Why would anyone make such malicious threats to the random bodyguard, they thought? During the whole interview process, the detectives kept going in and out of the room to take breaks. In reality, they were touching base with their colleagues who were finding a lot of dirt on Chris, including the information that Chris had a more intimate relationship with his female family friend Tara than he first let on. The plot thickens. The investigators came back into the room and brought up Tara's name again. Chris admitted a few steamy phone interactions with her, but reassured them he would never cheat on his wife. Chris told the detectives that he saw Tara at a Joyce Meyers conference in Florida, but he casually left off the part about him also meeting up with her in Arizona and Hawaii, getting promise rings together, and talking about tying the knot. I'm sorry, what? Chris claims to have talked about splitting up with Sherry at one point, but after going to therapy, he said things got much better in their marriage. He went on and on about how much money he made as a bodyguard and said he'd been planning a trip to Disneyland with Sherry and the kids. But the detectives already knew that trip had been canceled, and Chris had booked a vacation to the Virgin Islands with Tara. That's an interesting place to go with your family friend. Now I'm going to add in the plant-based meats as well as green onions and a spice mixture. At the end of his interview, Chris reiterated that his wife was alive when he left her that morning, and he assumed some criminal was waiting for him to leave so they could go inside and harm his family. He said whoever did this deserved to be put away in jail. After Chris's interview, the detectives knew he was lying. His wounds, his affair, and his lack of questions about the crime made investigators put him at the top of the suspect list. But at the time, they still had no physical evidence against him, like the weapon or spray paint can. They also hadn't gotten the autopsy reports yet. While Chris's parents, who were both pastors, told the cops there was no way their son would do such a thing, friends of Sherry's thought otherwise. Investigators looked through Sherry's messages with her friends and discovered she was extremely unhappy with the way Chris treated her and her kids. Chris apparently told Sherry he wanted a divorce because she and their two sons were getting in the way of his job. Last I checked, it takes two people to get married and have kids. In one text to a friend, Sherry wrote, "If something happens to me, Chris did it." Yo, I'm really starting to think that's the case. Chris is acting super sketch. But on the other hand, the letters and emails make it seem like some psycho Joyce Meyers hater did it, right? Get a load of this. Investigators found out the threatening email sent to Joyce Meyers, her son, and Chris from the email address destroychris@gmail.com actually originated from Chris's laptop. And a lot of Chris's work files included the word opportunities misspelled the same exact way as it was in the threatening email Chris received. Bro, have you heard of autocorrect? It will save you from future embarrassment and incriminating evidence. When detectives went through Chris's phone, they found a notes tab labeled Tara. It included her height, eye color, pant size, bust size, and all of her favorite perfumes, flowers, and ring cuts, as well as their future daughter's name, Zoe Lynn Coleman. OMG. This is insane. Chris also wrote down a few dates. One said, "The day Tara changed my life, 11/5/08." And another was her dog's birthday. Okay, I'm impressed Tara knows her dog's birthday, let alone Chris. As if it wasn't already clear that Chris and Tara were serious, investigators found plenty of explicit photos exchanged between the two. But even though Chris was all about Tara, he seemed to despise his wife. Friends and neighbors mentioned Chris and Sherry were never intimate with each other anymore, and Chris was also very vocal about his frustrations. He lamented to one of his neighbors that he worked 80 to 90 hours a week protecting some millionaire lady I don't even like, while my old lady gets to sit at home in this nice big house. Later, he complained about how much money Sherry would spend and expressed his desire to divorce her, but knew he'd lose his job if he did. I'm guessing because divorce is frowned upon in the Christian faith. But so is adultery, buddy boy. On May 19th, a big break was made in the case. A well-known forensic pathologist was brought in to examine the bodies, and on the 19th, he called to confirm that Sherry and the kids were all executed before 3 a.m. If you remember, Chris said Sherry was still alive when he left around 5:45. With that, officers arrested Chris and charged him with manslaughter. Since the trial was set for April 25th of 2011, there was still a lot of time for detectives to gather evidence. And boy, did they find something spicy. When looking through Chris's credit card charges, officials noticed a $3.77 purchase from February 9th at a hardware store. They called the store to find out what it was for, and the clerk said he bought some spray paint, Rust-Oleum, apple red. Got him! On the day of the trial, Chris rolled up with a bulletproof vest on. Dang, you know you're hated by the public when that's your core outfit. So the prosecution presented a pretty solid case to prove Chris was guilty. They went over incriminating evidence that we've already discussed and highlighted the many motives Chris would have to do something. So as you already know, Chris was having marital issues and Sherry was clearly fearful for her life. But as much as Chris wanted to divorce her, that would mean he would get fired from his job, losing all of his money. Chris and Tara's relationship seemed to be getting serious, and authorities suspected Tara was giving Chris ultimatums. But if he couldn't get a divorce without losing his source of income or being condemned by the church, there seemed to be one solution: to execute Sherry. To back up this claim, prosecutors showed scandalous photos and videos between Chris and Tara. Chris seemed to have thought this through for a while and tried to make it seem like the crime was committed by someone else. The emails, the letter, the spray paint, it all seemed to be a part of Chris's plan. At the trial, several witnesses were brought to the stand to give their 2 cents about the crime. Tara got up there wearing her promise ring and a cross necklace. She admitted her relationship with Chris and said he promised to give Sherry divorce papers on May 4th. But then he apparently texted back saying there had been a typo and he was going to do it on May 5th, which is the same day Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin Coleman were slain. While Joyce Meyers wasn't at the trial in person, she sent in a pre-recorded video where she talked about her relationship with Chris. She said she knew Chris since he was a kid because his parents attended her conferences. Joyce admitted to knowing Chris and Sherry were experiencing marital problems, but said she had no idea he was having an affair. In April of 2009, Joyce reported Chris starting to act strange. He wasn't as attentive and kept forgetting things. On May 4th, aka one day before the crime, Chris called Joyce to ask if he could have the day off because he wasn't feeling well. Joyce said he had never done that before. When the defense presented their side, they pointed out the lack of direct evidence that linked Chris to the crime. They harped on the fact that the officials were unable to find any specks of spray paint on his clothing, which Chris could have just destroyed, and they reiterated that the weapons still hadn't been found. On top of that, the defense attorney said Chris had no criminal record and even said Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin could have passed away after 5 a.m., even though medical professionals concluded otherwise. Well, on May 5th, 2011, which happened to be the 2-year anniversary of the crime, the jury came back with their verdict: guilty on all counts. Chris Coleman was sentenced to 3 life terms without the possibility of parole, and the crowd waiting outside of the courthouse went wild. But that's not where the story ends. Despite the verdict, Chris maintained his innocence and requested a retrial. His attorney filed a petition arguing that the jury's verdict was based on the explicit photos that should not have been presented in the way they were. When reviewing the evidence, the judge granted the prosecution permission to present some of the raunchy pictures between Chris and Tara, but said their genitals had to be censored. But there were 4 uncensored images with timestamps placed on the back of an evidence display. Chris's team apparently found out that some of the jurors said those images and the timestamps on them affected their decision that day. At the beginning of the deliberation process, it was allegedly 7-5, and after seeing these images, all 12 jurors came to a consensus because the dates on the photos weren't consistent with Chris's testimony of when he and Tara began seeing each other. Thankfully, after thoroughly reviewing the evidence, the judge dismissed Chris's petition for a retrial because he didn't think the way the evidence was handled would have changed the case. So it seems like Chris will be stuck in the slammer for life, and I couldn't be happier to hear that. You wanna know something though? I almost hate Chris's dad, Ron, just as much as I hate the criminal himself. When asked about his son's affair, Ron literally tried to justify it by saying Tara was just meeting a need that Sherry at the time wasn't taking care of. I mean, every man has got his desires and every man has to be respected. It's built into every man. If your wife doesn't respect you, then you're going to find respect someplace else. Isn't that so annoying? And the dude is a pastor. He's basically approving of his son committing adultery. Get a load of that. And get a load of my loaded nacho fries. They look amazing, don't they? Well, I guess there's only one way to find out. See you next time.